Hi, and welcome to chapter 25. And we're going to look at our first objective here in productivity. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. There we are. Okay, so what we're looking at in this particular video is we're going to talk about production and growth. So production takes a look at how effectively are we using land, labor, capital. And a really easy, down and dirty way to calculate productivity or production is to take outputs, see, there we go, outputs divided by inputs. So that's a really kind of easy way of thinking about productivity, okay? Here we're going to take a look at how productivity influences production and economic growth and share some of the kind of, excuse me, overarching guiding principles of productivity. And then I have a short video, 2 minutes, 48 seconds, by Hal Varian, who is the chief economist at Google. Okay, so the first thing we want to understand is real GDP per person. And all we know at this point is per person basically takes real GDP, remember that's been adjusted for inflation, and divides it by the population. Okay, it varies a lot from country to country. And this is when we talk about the growth rate, this is what we're looking at. So how rapidly did real GDP per person grow? Okay, and again, if we look at it, there are differences, obviously, in growth rates. We're going to talk about some of those differences in upcoming objectives. So here's some examples. We have China, and again, this is to 2017, China, Japan, and so on, the United States, and growth rates. China actually decided that it wanted to get to a 4% growth rate in 2020. That was its target. However, due to Corona, they actually have revised these targets a lot lower, as have all of these nations. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and this is going to cut out, have a transition, and then we will see the next video. Bye.
Well, productivity growth measures the increased production of output over time, and it's what we leave to the future, the fact that we're having higher standard of living, higher consumption, higher production decades from now. If you look at the next decade, 2020 to 2030, you're going to see the lowest growth in the labor force ever. And all of those baby boomers that are retiring, they expect to continue to consume. So who's going to produce the things they consume? We've got to have a more productive labor force in order to make that happen. There's a lot of free goods out there now that just weren't there before, and those don't show up in GDP. So I'll give you an example. Back in 2000, there were about 80 billion photos taken in the world, and they cost about 50 cents a piece when you look at developing and film. Last year, there were 1.6 trillion photos taken in the world, and they were basically free. So for the most part, that doesn't show up in GDP, but in the normal non-economic sense of the word, you'd have to say, gosh, photography has become a lot more productive. And as they got cheaper and cheaper, that had a positive effect on GDP until they had zero. And as soon as they had zero, they're out of GDP. No more quality growth could show up in that product just by definition. So a lot of the products we've seen now, particularly digital projects, have become far cheaper, far higher quality, and yet they don't have a full impact on GDP. If you go back and look at electricity, it took 30 years for the productivity advances from electricity to really show up in GDP. And you could look at other big inventions, a gasoline engine, electric motors, same problem. Well, we saw a surge in productivity growth in the 90s, and most people attribute that to the widespread use of PCs, personal computing. And now, what's the device of the day? It's mobile phone. And if you look at mobile services in general, consumers are very alert to how they're used, but I don't think they've really had as much impact on productivity yet as you might hope. We've got these great new technologies that have come out of Silicon Valley and other places, and companies are still learning how to deploy them. I think there's going to be an increase in growth because we're going to see a lot of potential novel mechanisms used for production.